Good evening, everybody. We are on to our next chapter, which is 1 Samuel 5. And last week I told you I wasn't sure if we were going to continue through all of 1 Samuel. And I'm still not sure of that, but we are going to go a ways in 1 Samuel. And it's an exercise because we are going to read some Old Testament narrative that even in your general reading you might have skipped over at times, or you may consider a one-time event that you never need to think about again. But we're going to be drawing on that, and we're going to be taking the assumption that the New Testament completes the Old Testament, therefore we need to understand the Old Testament and understand the God of the Old Testament. And he's going to do some pretty interesting things today in our chapter. So I'm going to ask Jesse if you would read that for us, and then we'll get started.
1 Samuel chapter 5, beginning verse 1. So as after the Philistines had captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod and brought it into the temple of Dagon and placed it next to his statue. When the people of Ashdod got up early the next morning, there was Dagon fallen with his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and returned him to his place. But when they got up early the next morning, there was Dagon fallen with his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. This time Dagon's head and both of his hands were broken off and lying on the threshold. Only Dagon's torso remained. That is why, still today, the priests of Dagon and everyone who enters the temple of Dagon in Ashdod do not step on Dagon's threshold. The Lord's hand was heavy on the people of Ashdod. He terrified the people of Ashdod and its territory and afflicted them with tumors. When the people of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, "The ark of Israel's God must not stay here with us, because his hand is strongly against us and our god Dagon." So they called all the Philistine rulers together and asked, "What shall we do with the ark of Israel's God?" "The ark of Israel's God should be moved to Gath," they replied. So they moved the ark of Israel's God. After they had moved it, the Lord's hand was against the city of Gath, causing a great panic. He afflicted the people of this city, from the youngest to the oldest, with an outbreak of tumors. The people of Gath then set the ark of God to Ekron. And when it got there, the Ekronites cried out, "They've moved the ark of Israel's God to us to kill us and our people." The Ekronites called on the Philistine rulers together. They said, "Send the ark of Israel's God away. Let it return to its place so it won't kill us and our people." For the fear of death pervaded the city. God's hand was opposing them. Those who did not die were afflicted with tumors, and the outcry of the city went up to heaven.
Thank you, Jesse. All right, keep that microphone because we're going to do something in a minute. But first, I wanted to just really briefly remind us of why this, and you can see the picture of it here, why the ark is not with the Israelites, okay? And I wanted to read something from Hannah's prayer first, and that's in chapter 2. It says, "There is only one holy like the Lord. Indeed, there was no one besides thee, nor is there any rock like that of our God." Down to verse 7 says, "The Lord makes poor and rich. He brings low, and he also exalts." And then verse 10, "Those who contend with the Lord will be shattered. Against them he will thunder in the heavens. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth, and he will give strength to his king, and will exalt the horn of his anointed." So we had that sort of sprinkling of truth in the midst of everything else that's going on during this period of time. And so while we continue this sort of cycle that the Israelites go through all through Judges, they do the same thing over and over again. Is there anybody willing to summarize what the Israelites did all through Judges? Why they needed a judge? What's the sort of cycle of events that happened over and over and over and over? Happened with Deborah, happened with Gideon, happened with Samson. What's the cycle that happens in Judges over and over and over again? Does anybody know? Anybody willing to say? Eva's willing to say. So we're going to pass the mic to you if you don't mind. Maybe Jesse will help me pass the mic for a couple minutes. Thank you.
So basically, the people of Israel decide that they don't feel like obeying God, so they fall into a pattern of idol worship, and then they end up bringing basically destruction upon themselves. Other nations that were surrounding them would come in and invade and enslave, and then they would remember, oh yeah, God can save us,
Right.
and they would go back to worshiping God.
That's right. We are in one of those cycles right now, right? So we are in this place where the Israelites use the Ark of God like it's a token, like it's a genie's bottle, right? They forget who God really is, and they say, well, we'll win as long as we have the Ark, which is, we talked about last week, that's a mistake, right? It isn't the Ark, it is God. And if God's not with the Ark, you don't win, right? So they are, again, in one of these. And so as they're losing, again, to the Philistines, this time it's the Philistines who's oppressing them and fighting over territory, likely territory anyway. They say, well, we always win when we ring out our little pendant or whatever, except this is the Ark of God. And in this case, God fulfills the prophecy that Eli's sons are both going to die on the same day. They come walking in again, remember, with the Ark. And a lot of people are killed. It's a great slaughter. The Israelites melt away, right? And they go back to their tents. There's only a couple times in the Old Testament where the Jews are almost exterminated. This is not a happy time. This is probably one of the worst possible times. Pretty much all of the men in their army are destroyed. And you have this powerful nation right next to you. I showed you guys on the map. The Philistines are right there. They're always bugging them. They're always like right in their face, 30 miles from Shiloh. They're not far away. So they always are inching toward each other and trying to steal a little bit back. But the Israelites lost, and so they're in big trouble. And one of the greatest, most monumental things that they did was they lost the Ark. They lost the Ark. And so the last part of chapter 4 talks about Eli finding out about how they lost the Ark, and he dies. And then Hophni's wife finds out about the Ark, and she's in labor and names her kid and pretty much says, nothing is good. This is the end of all things. We've lost the presence of God. We've lost the glory. And I just want to draw your attention just really quickly to what the Ark would have looked like, because the mercy seat is at the top. Does anybody know what would happen on the mercy seat? Does anybody know what it was used for? Jesse, you're holding the mic.
Well, they would place an offering there at the top of that.
Yeah. This was the place during the sort of the Feast of Atonement, right? So once a year there was going to be atonement for the sins, and there's going to be blood put on that mercy seat. And the mercy seat makes up the lid, and the lid is solid gold. The rest of it is wood overlaid with gold, but the top is solid gold. And you've got the cherubim, and the idea is that God is in between the cherubim. They're coming to meet God on that day of atonement, and they're going to sprinkle the blood. They're going to show that we want to atone for our sins, and that's where it's going to be. So that's a pretty big deal not to have anymore, because you don't have your atonement for sin anymore. This was what they used for atonement for sin. They don't have it. Not only did they lose, whatever it was, 35,000 men, but they don't have a place to atone for sin. And that's a really big deal. So that kind of brings us up to where we are now. We've finally cleaned house. The worthless sons of Eli are dead. Eli, who was neutral and useless, is dead. Samuel is growing, and we keep hearing about how his words are hitting home. They're like arrows. They don't hit the ground before they get to the target. They hit the target. So Samuel is growing. But the people's hearts are not changed, right? The people are still doing their same old stuff. It's sort of, let's go on to the next slide. We're going to do a little exercise real quick. So I wanted to ask you guys, and I need it like popcorn, so speak up, and maybe Jesse can just get the mic near enough to you. But what are some examples that we put in place as gods in our lives? You can use other religions as an example, or yourself, but what are things that we put in our lives as gods now? What do you think?
take presence over
Take the place of, right?
God would get in the way of your worship with him, would cause you to, like another book I've been reading, the falling away from the church. And what is it? It's all this stuff that the world hands to us every day and says, here it is, here. Do you want that? And, I don't want to take it all. I think Mary wanted to say
Mary,
something.
you're up. What do you think?
Sports and family.
Oh, you went there
As
right off the
you
bat.
See, a
So-
lot of sports are done on Sunday,
They are.
even at the local schools.
Sure. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a inherently evil thing that we can place as a God in our life. What are some other things? Think about other religions. What do other religions have? What do they have physical manifestations of these things. What are they? Anybody got a Buddha at home? I hope not. What was it? Yeah. Yeah, if you're around Catholics a lot, they tend to have something for everything. They've got a saint for everything, right? I had, anytime I had something in a previous job that I had lost, my coworker would slip in her little statue of Saint such and such. And he's the saint of finding lost things, right? She'd be like, oh, he'll help you. Oh boy, he'll help me, huh? So they literally have a token, right, to cover most things. Any others?
You guys are way too young, but back years ago, in some collector cars I've looked at, many Catholics would have either something glued to their dash or from the mirror, and that was kind of the thing.
Yeah.
And you always had some kind of a statue of something there, if you were
Yeah.
Catholic, to just show other people that was your belief.
A lot of people had a statue of Mary in their car just to, and then, if you still got in an accident that day, she must have been looking the wrong way or something, like, I don't know. She wasn't watching you that day, yeah.
So years ago, it used to be a rabbit's foot
Yeah,
for good luck.
yeah. So I studied that a little bit too as I was thinking about all these lucky things. You've got horseshoes. Like, I wanted to know the background behind some of these, and they're ridiculous. I mean, some of the backgrounds are really ridiculous. Jesse, you know?
Well, when I always think about these gods that were back in their day, I always think about how they're on the highest places, the most visible places. It seems like that's where they would build the altar to make it visible to the entire nation.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I come to us today, I always think about, what is everybody looking at? And it's like their phone, their computer, their TV. Everybody is looking at it, and everybody is communicating with it in some degree, right? And then when you start thinking about how some of these gods would foretell the future or whatever, it's no wonder that as a people we're addicted to the news or whatever, because we're trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future. You know what I mean? It's like a window into the future that's given to us by something we can look at as a community. You know what I mean? And you start putting those things together, it's like, man, this TV thing is kind of scary.
It is. I asked you this because humans have done this over and over again. And so while we think of ourselves as smarter and more cunning than the people back then, because I might not make a little statue of a half fish man, which is what Dagon is, we do it in other ways. We're very cunningly putting things before God. And so when we read through this, the idea that you would skip over this chapter because you don't think you need the Old Testament anymore, we're going to look at what God does with those people. And it's not a happy time, right? So there's meaning to this for us today. Not that we have to read the Bible as if you're going to get something out of it for today. But let's remember that, right? This is a particular time with particular people. But the cycles that those people went through, like in Judges, like what these guys do, are very similar. And I'm going to draw on two things. One is sort of how Christians get into cycles with God, and then how non-Christians get into cycles with God, because both are going to be portrayed here. Between the Israelites and the way they just did it, where they were not close with God, but they still wanted God to do what they wanted him to do, so they trotted out the ark. So they only came to God when they really wanted something. We do that. And then you have the Philistines who do these crazy things that don't make any sense to say, get that out of my face. I don't want that anywhere near me. Get that as far away from me as you can get it, because it didn't line up with their belief system, so they had to throw it out. And so most of my premise for us tonight is this. When you do not worship the one true God completely, you're going to fill that gap with everything else, right? You're going to fill it with something. And what that comes back to is I pretty much am filling it with me. I'm the God. I'm the God, right? If I'm the God who wants a saint to find me something, if I'm the God who wants to pray to a Buddha, if I'm the God, it's me, right? It's me, and I'll come when I need something. And we think the Philistines are, these barbaric people because they had a god for everything. They had a god for the hills. They had a god for the valleys. They had places and things associated with different gods. We still do that. We just don't sound as barbaric as they do. So I want you to just keep that forefront in your mind, that if you have stuff that you have put up as a god, this is how God views that, all right? So let's skip to the next slide. Okay. So here's your picture, and we're just going to go ahead and get started. Now the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. And I wanted to give you just a simple picture of what Dagon sort of looks like. And so the bottom of him is fish-like, right? He's got sort of the fishy tail. The top section is more human. And that is who they had worshipped. These Philistines, or some semblance of peoples, had worshipped Dagon for like 1,000 years already up until this point. And Dagon was considered a fertility god. So they did have gods for other things, but he was the cream of the crop for them. And it's interesting what they do, right? So they don't destroy the ark. They don't burn the ark. They don't paint over the ark. What do? They take it and they put it in there with Dagon. Because these people, when they look at Dagon, say that's one of many gods. And they've seen some of the power of the Israelite God. So they said, here, Dagon, look at who you just conquered. They were putting them together to say, either we need both of you. Hey, when we need you, we'll talk to you. When we need you, we'll talk to you. Or it was this, this presence, this power of like, Dagon, look at what you did. Look at this awesome thing you did for us, and here's the God of the Hebrews. Let's read on. When the Ashdodites arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and set him in his place again. Let's just pause a moment and think about a God to be worshipped that can fall over, that you have to set back up. You can't speak, can't move. You literally have to pick it back up. It takes you almost having to have a different mind to do that. And then the idea that this has never happened before until we took the ark in there, no one paused and said, maybe we should question whether Dagon's the most important God. Maybe this isn't the right thing. But they don't do it. They set him right back up. There you go, Dagon. Sorry about that. Something weird must have happened. Hope you're comfortable now. Hopefully the wind doesn't blow you over next time. We'll go on to the next one. But when they arose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both palms of his hands were cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. So we see it happen 2 days in a row, except this time we're left with a stump. We're left with a fishtail. That's all we have left of this God that they thought they could stick in there with the Ark of the Covenant. So I want you to see all throughout this, if the Israelites were in covenant with God in the right way, this is what God does. God wins. God goes in there and wins for you. And he's still winning without the Israelites. The Israelites are not even here. But he's saying, you're not going to stick me, you're superstitious people, you're not going to stick me in there with a fish man. I'm going to make you think twice about that fish man. And here's what they do with that. Therefore, neither the priests of Dagon nor all who enter Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. So they set something in place that says, hey guys, remember that time he fell over? So now every time we enter, we got to kind of hop over that spot. Let's remind ourselves how great our God is by we got to hop over the threshold because he had fallen. He had fallen right there. This is in essence what the non-Christian does with God. Honestly, this is in the face of overwhelming evidence that your way doesn't work. You still just do it the old superstitious way your mom did it or your dad did it. In the face of God working in others all around you, you ignore it and you make up new traditions about it. Because someone should have said something. God's showing them his power and they're not seeing it. So we're going to go on a little further and see what happens next. Verse 6, now the hand of the Lord was heavy on the Ashdodites, and he ravaged them and smote them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territories. This feels very much like how you would treat a child a little bit. It's very much cause and effect with God right now. He's showing them, hey, put me in here with this, bad things happen, I destroy your God. You still don't get it? Leave me here. I'm going to inflict, we're going to inflict pain upon you. And this is an interesting thing because he ravaged them with tumors. And some translations talk about it, and the King James, if anybody's reading out of King James, they call it emerods. And the Septuagint version refers to it and makes note that these are tumors in the private places. And so some English translations just call them hemorrhoids. So not only are they being inflicted with tumors, this is like the worst possible, kind of the worst, most uncomfortable situation you can be in. Likely this is similar to a bubonic plague because they end up talking about mice and rats potentially having spread it. So this might have been a local pandemic to them of the bubonic plague. We'll keep going. When the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, the ark of God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is severe on us and on Dagon our God. So they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines to them and said, what shall we do with the ark of God of Israel? And they said, let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath. And they brought the ark of the God Israel to Gath. This is a really weird way to approach this. I can't totally tell you why they made this decision, because Gath is one of the Philistine cities. So why would you experience horrible tumors in one city and say the answer is let's send it somewhere else? There might have been some arrogance, some pride in this. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe if we just move it away, the people won't think it's inflicting it, but I don't really know. They seem to know that this is what's inflicting them with tumors, and yet they say, on to city number 2. It just doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what they did. Let's see what happens next. So they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines. Sorry, I got to skip down here. And it came about that after they had brought it around, the hand of the Lord was against the city with very great confusion, and he smote the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. So then they sent the ark on to Ekron. And it happened as the ark of God came to Ekron, that the Ekronites cried out, saying, "They have brought the ark of God of Israel around to kill us and our people." Harry, would you give me the next slide? So this is the path that it's on, okay? So Shiloh's where it starts. They send it over to Ebenezer, which is where the battle is between Ebenezer and Aphek. And then they take it down to Ashdod. Now we're into Gath. Now we're on to Ekron. So you can see the 5 cities of the Philistines. And their answer of being, let's just keep it moving on down the line here. Until finally, the people of Ekron say, I can't believe they're sending it to us. They must hate us. It's going to kill us. This is an amazing story of man's stupidity, of man's pride, of man's need to be in charge. They could not recognize city after city after city as people were dying of a plague that clearly came with the ark, that Yahweh was in charge. They could not get rid of all those gods. They had to keep them. And this is the part that sounds crazy, but when I thought more about this week, when you talk about TV is an excellent example. You watch it literally turn your kids into slobs, turn your kids into using the wrong foul language, delaying them in their speech, delaying them in their growth, delaying them in their learning. But we don't get rid of it. We don't send that God out the door and say 8 hours of TV and 0 hours in the Bible equals good things, right? We don't do it. So we can't think these people are so crazy, because video games and TV are melting your kids' brains. They are melting our brains. And worse, they're changing our minds. They're changing our minds away from God into this sort of, I've got to accept a little bit more of this, and I've got to accept a little bit more of this. Otherwise, I'm a racist. Otherwise, someone's going to say I'm mean. Otherwise, I can't say that. I can't say that. I can't say that. You're neutered. The truth can't come out of you anymore. And a lot of it is that conduit. And Satan has used that conduit. Satan has used that conduit to give us access to every bad preacher there is. He's used that conduit to give us easy access to the most sinful things you can imagine. We get creative about the sin in our lives. The sin that we have access to is unbelievable. And most of it comes through some screen. And yet, how many of us are going to go home and turn them off? Well, maybe we should take it seriously. The other part of this is, some of this is the mercy of God. And I understand that seems a little weird. But when there is cause and effect, like I said, right? There's cause and effect. It's obvious. We brought in this God, bad things happen. We brought in this God, with bad things happen. He's showing as superstitious people a very clear answer, like a baby. Here it is, right? You are not honoring me, baby talk, right? It's not complicated. It's very clear cut. In his mercy, he's saying, if you don't want to sin much longer, give that ark back. Send it back to where it belongs. It should not stay here. It should not stay here. And you're not worshiping it right anyway. You shouldn't worship it. So they didn't get it. But just like kids who need early on in life sort of that baby talk, he's giving it to these people. Literally giving it to these people. They don't turn around. And in fact, even their own weird spiritual leaders ask them, why are you hardening your hearts? In the next chapter, why are you hardening your hearts just like the Egyptians did? So even their healers knew, or not their healers, their spiritual God people, whatever they were, said, you're doing the same thing. You're allowing plagues into your life. All right. The other thing about it is, as you look at that map, how far did the Israelites under their power win? How many arrows did they cover? How many times did they defeat the Philistines on this map? Does anybody know? Well, sorry, I probably should phrase this differently. So, when the Israelite armies were present, how many victories were winning? How many times did they win in all of those Philistine cities? They started in Shiloh, remember? Then they camped out at Ebenezer, and they got destroyed. Everything else happened just because the ark was there. So just because the Israelites lost does not mean God lost. And likely, the amount of death that came from this plague is the only thing that held the Philistines back from just destroying Israel completely. Right? It says in some of these towns there were huge amounts of death. The men, the older and young men, died. So God goes himself in the ark where he wanted to be, in the ark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cities, and said, you guys can't win anything. I'll take care of it. This is the exact same pattern, remember, from Judges. Samson was not great. Samson had long hair. Samson was great because God gave him strength, right? He had strength in the moment. This is the exact same thing, except he no longer is even using humans. It's just the ark, and it comes and decimates the entire Philistine population so they can't go and finish off the rest of the Israelites. That's just amazing. So God doesn't lose, but when you don't go with him, you lose. That's what we have here. All right, we'll keep going. We'll finish this part, and we'll have a little discussion at the end probably too. Okay. They sent therefore and gathered the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of the God of Israel and let it return to its own place, that it may not kill us and our people. For there was a deadly confusion throughout the city. The hand of God was very heavy there. And the men who did not die were smitten with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. So anybody who was left, any man who didn't die, all those men who won that great victory, any of them that didn't die from this had tumors. They were sort of annihilated. Now you've got two weakened countries next to each other, but they're not going to wipe out and take out Israel, which is amazing. There's parts of this that we want to consider Old Testament God, right? You want to say, that's the Old Testament God. Oh, that's the Old Testament God. I don't particularly like that God. He's the Old Testament God. He doesn't do this kind of thing anymore. Well, we are under a new covenant, and Jesus did do everything that we needed him to do, but this is still the same God, and he can be terrible. He terrorized those cities. He wiped those cities out because they didn't worship him. They didn't put him first. So when we throw out the God of the Old Testament, say, I don't like to think of him like that. I don't like to think of him like that. He's a God of love. He gives me what I need when I need it. This is still the same God, and doesn't like being second. Doesn't like having other gods in the room with him. Take it seriously. Take those other gods seriously. I thought of a lot of examples that I could give you guys of this, of something more recent. And unfortunately, I'm stuck with sort of one of my own. So I'm going to get on. I'll be honest with you guys. The cycle that the people went through Judges, and this sort of using God as a token, which is, again, what each place wanted to do, is very, very similar still to how we act. And I'm going to, like I said, I'll give you my example. I grew up healthy. I grew up in a good Christian household. I grew up in Interlaken, which I love. I've never actually been outside of Interlaken as far as a house. I met my wife here when she was like 13 years old. I've loved my life with her. We had huge plans together, what we thought were great plans together. And when we knew by the time we were 15 that if we got married, we wanted kids, right? There was no question about it. It was just a matter of time. And so we got pregnant and found out almost immediately that there was an issue. And during that time, God drew me real close to him because I had to completely depend on him. All of the news seemed bad. We didn't know if we were going to have a survivor or not. We didn't know if he would walk or not, or talk or not. And no one could reassure us. There was never a reassuring doctor, ever. They all covered themselves and said, this is probably pretty bad. And then we had a discussion about an abortion with one of the doctors too. They had the discussion with us, if you know what I mean. Like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this? There was never any question, but that's where we got to. During that time, that first year, we didn't know how bad it was. Could have been way worse than it is, but we didn't know how bad it was. Still, I was as tight to God as I could get. I had nothing else to depend on. Doctors were never right. They gave me 6 different diagnoses in the first 3 years. They were never, ever right. They've never done a treatment. They've never done anything. And so we were really close. And sometime in between there, things got sort of normal again. And the more normal it got, the more I wanted easy life. The more I wanted just, God, haven't I done my penance? God, I don't want you to allow bad things in my life anymore. I've done it now, right? I need some ease. And the more you say me and the more you say I, you fall further away. Second child, no issues. So that time got extended. Third child comes along, seemingly no issues until 2 weeks old when we got rushed to Syracuse and they thought she was having seizures for a week. And I went right back like that, right back close, right? These bad things would happen and I had nothing left to depend on when I thought I was going to lose my daughter, right? Nothing left. Then times goes by, she's beautiful, my kids are fine, and you get a little further away, and my dreams start to creep back in. I didn't quite learn my lesson. I'm in that same cycle that they were in during the Judges. Bad things would happen, they would remember, and then they want the easy life. Then, a few years later, flood came and destroyed my cars and traumatized my kids, and I said, God, I don't know how many more times I want to do this. I really don't. This is awful. This is not what we planned. This is not how it was supposed to go. But again, close to God. Bad things happen close to God. And there's something about never quite learning that permanency, that permanent lesson about staying there the whole time and not ever going back to wanting ease. And that is, to me, that's literally the fight we are in with our sinful nature. That sinful nature the sinful nature that always wants to pull us back, always wants to have us being focused on me and my ease. And this last 5 months with Heather, I pray differently than I've ever prayed in my entire life. And I still have no answers. Right? At this point, I have no reason to think anything's going back to normal. And so when I say all this as an example, we're still serving the same God. We're still making some of the same mistakes. There's definitely moments where I think, I wonder if what she's going through is because of the sin in my life. And God's trying to expose it in our family until it's gone, until it's wiped out. And he said, yes, I was there for you then, and I was there for you then, and I was there for you then. Why aren't you there? Why aren't you with me all the time? So when we look at the other gods in our life, for the majority of us, if you look at it closely, it's going to be you. Because if you want to watch lots of TV, that's about you. It's fun. It's fun to make fun of the other side. It's fun to be on a team. It's fun to watch football. It's fun to, all of these things. It's about me again. And my comfort. Because this world stinks a lot of the time. We're mean to each other. We break down, our bodies break down. There's death all around us. Especially now, there's death all around us. There's a pandemic. And you're always called an insane person for saying that God might be judging. Well, he's judging. He's judging us. He does it now very personally, and he'll do it corporately. He'll do it as a country. We are serving the same God. And so what I'm trying to say is, if we're serving that same God, we need to have some reverence. We need to understand who he is. And if there are gods in our life that we spend more hours with than him, we have got to get rid of them. And they come in every form. For me, I don't want any more pain in my life. I don't want any pain in my kids' lives. I don't want them to have to think about their mom being sick. We're trying to plan for school. We're miserable about that. Because you know what? It went really badly when she's sick. I can't teach them from work. I have to go to work. And it went pretty bad. And we're facing that again. Our kids are not excited about it. Heather's not excited about it. But when we stop long enough to say, did God get us through whatever the conditions are that my kids have? Did God get us through losing what we lost in the flood? Did God get us through all of the bad things in our past? Not maybe in the best way, not the best way. Not maybe the way I would have preferred, but he did. And so the idea that I could live 30 or 40 more years and have a similar cycle makes me want to run into the woods screaming. I'd rather just get close to God. That's his mercy to me. That's his mercy as his child saying, again, the further you are from me, the further you are from a good life. Come back to me. The further you are from me, the further your kids are from a good life. Come back to me. And all those things that you thought were important, which are money and power and ease and stuff, is all distracting you from that. And so Jeremy and Heather at 18, when they made the plans that they made about the kind of house we were going to have and where we were going to live, none of that's going to happen. At least not anytime soon. It's not going to happen. And that's because God has a better way for us. So if you have similar pain like that in your life, just like with these guys who were children, you are his children as well. He may not inflict tumors on you, but just like a child, when you need it, he will say, look here. Stop looking at that screen. Stop looking at yourself. Stop listening to that inner voice in your head that just never shuts up. Look here for a second. Look here for a second. It's me. Come back to me. He does that because he cares about you, because one day the end is going to come and you will either be in a great space with him or not. He may be drawing people who are atheists. You know how much faith it takes to be an atheist? The idea that that's not a God is craziness. People even make their diets a God. They call themselves a whatever. I'm a vegetarian, right? They can let anything consume them. And so I don't want us to miss the God of the Old Testament and what he did when he was misused. And let's not misuse him. Let's not misuse him. The Philistines didn't bow down, and the Israelites used him like he was just some genie. Neither of those are good enough for God. He should be first. In reverence, he should be first. All right. So we're going to find out next time in chapter 6 how they get this thing back to the Israelites, because they don't want it anymore. This has become a little too uncomfortable with the hemorrhoids and the tumors and the death that it's got to go back home. Get it out of our country. All right. Let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we pray that if there are other gods for the people in this room, me included, God, that you would absolutely show us what they are. If there are superstitions, God, in this room, that you would show us how silly they are. If we only come to you, God, when we need you, when bad things are happening, and then we fall away as soon as it's easy again, God, get us out of that. Get us out of this cycle. God, we know that only when we're with you will things be perfect. But God, help us to fight to be close to you at all times, in the good and in the bad. Don't let the bad turn us away. God, don't let it harden our hearts like it hardened the hearts of the Philistines and the Egyptians. God, I pray for peace. And God, if there are times coming of joyous celebration in this group, that we would joyously celebrate together. But God, if there's hard times coming too, that we would be there for each other and remind each other of this all the time, that we should be looking for you in everything. And if there's something in between us and you, God, that we'll never see you. If there's drastic change that needs to happen in the households here or anyone listening, I pray that they would do it. I pray that you would give us the power, God, because we are living in an imperfect world with selfish, fleshy bodies and minds, God, that just care about ourselves. Even when we do right, God, we're doing it for ourselves most of the time. I just pray that you would give us your heart, your mind, your eyes, your hands. Help us to truly be the body of Christ. And when one of us is suffering or distracted, we would jump over and around and through anything to get them back. God, we know there's a lot of unspoken issues here. There always are. And I just pray that you would give the right person the right words to say, to encourage them. And first of all, God, I just pray that they would put them before you and know that you're the only source. Everything here is going to fail us. We thank you again, God, for who you are and for your reminder tonight of your mercy even through pain. Keep our perspectives right, and we just thank you and praise you. In your name, amen.